Do you believe that when we die, that is truly the end? That everything we are, every memory, every feeling, every experience just disappears into nothing? Because what you are about to hear might completely change your answer to that question. Imagine a 3-year-old child walks up to a grown man he has never met in his life, calls him by his full name, and says, "You killed me with an axe." And then that child leads a group of adults to a field, points to a pile of stones, and says, "My body is buried right there." They dig, and they find a skeleton. That is not a movie. That is not a creepypasta. That actually happened. And it is just one of 6 cases we are going to cover today. These are real, documented cases of children, some as young as 2 years old, who described in terrifying detail how they were killed in a previous life. Children who named their murderers, children who led investigators to buried bodies, children who recognized the faces of people they had never met in this lifetime, but apparently knew intimately in another. And here is the part that makes all of this so impossible to dismiss. In several of these cases, the details these children provided were independently verified. Skeletons were unearthed, murder weapons were recovered, killers confessed, courts accepted the testimony, and researchers from the University of Virginia, one of the most respected academic institutions in the world, spent decades studying these accounts and came away saying these cases demand an explanation. Over 2,500 cases across dozens of countries, spanning nearly every culture and religion on the planet, yet with patterns so consistent that even hardcore skeptics have had to pause and reconsider what they thought they knew about consciousness, memory, and death. So let's get into the first case, and trust me, this one is going to send chills down your spine from the very first sentence. Number 1, the 3-year-old who found his own skeleton. In the Golan Heights, a region near the border of Syria and Israel, a boy was born into the Druze community with a long red birthmark stretching across his head. Now, for the Druze people, birthmarks are not just random skin conditions. They believe birthmarks are connected to the way a person died in their previous life. So when this boy was born with that distinctive red mark, his family paid very close attention. And sure enough, as soon as the child could speak, he told his parents something that stopped them cold. He said that in his previous life, he had been killed by a blow to the head with an axe. At first, you might think, okay, maybe a toddler heard a scary story somewhere and his imagination ran wild. But here is where things get very strange. In Druze tradition, when a child who is around 3 years old begins talking about a past life, village elders take the child to different villages to see if the memories can be verified. And that is exactly what happened. The elders, along with Dr. Eli Lash, a prominent physician in Israel who had a deep interest in reincarnation research, took the boy on a journey through neighboring villages. When they arrived at the first village, they asked the boy if this was where he had lived before. He said no. They went to a second village. Again, no. But when they reached the third village, the boy's entire demeanor changed. He looked around and said, "This is where I lived." And then he did something that made everyone's blood run cold. He remembered his own name from his previous life, his first and last name, and then he remembered the first and last name of the man who killed him. The group found the man the boy had named, and when the 3-year-old walked up to this grown man, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You killed me with an axe," the man's face turned completely white. But the boy was not finished. He told the group, "I can show you where he buried my body." He led them into the nearby fields, stopped in front of a pile of stones, and said, "He buried me right here, and the axe is over there." They dug beneath those stones, and they found the skeleton of an adult man still wearing farmer's clothes. And on the skull there was a long split, perfectly consistent with an axe wound in the exact same location as the boy's birthmark. Then they went to the second spot the boy had pointed to, and they found the axe. The accused killer standing right there in front of all the villagers, and Dr. Lash had no choice. He confessed to the murder. This entire case was documented by Dr. Lash and later published by German therapist Trutz Hardow in his book about children who remember past lives. And to this day, no one has been able to offer a conventional explanation for how a 3-year-old child led adults to a hidden grave and a concealed murder weapon, identified his killer by full name, and carried a birthmark that matched the fatal wound on the skeleton they unearthed. Is it possible that this child really was carrying the memories of a murdered man? That his soul, for lack of a better word, simply picked up where it left off? Here is what makes this case so difficult to explain away with conventional logic. The man who had gone missing was not a well-known figure. He was a farmer, a neighbor, the kind of person whose disappearance might be talked about for a few months and then slowly forgotten. There were no news reports, no public investigations, no documentaries. The information this boy carried in his head existed only in the memories of the people who lived in that village, and in the mind of the killer who had buried the body. And yet, a 3-year-old child, born years after the murder, carried that same information, not vague impressions, not general feelings, exact names, exact locations, exact wounds. When Dr. Lash asked the Druze elders what would happen to the confessed killer, they told him they would not turn the man over to the police. Instead, they would handle justice within the community in their own way. What that justice looked like was never publicly disclosed. If you are already struggling to explain that one, then hold on, because what comes next is even harder to rationalize. Before we continue, here is a quick question for you. If you could remember one thing from a past life, what would you want it to be? A skill you once had? A place you once lived? A person you once loved? Drop your answer in the comments. We are genuinely curious to see what everyone says. Now, and the first case took place in a culture where reincarnation is a deeply held belief, and skeptics might argue that the community's expectations influenced what the child said and how the investigation was conducted. Fair enough. But what happens when the same kind of case shows up in a family of devout Christians in the American South, a family with absolutely no belief in reincarnation, and a father who was actively trying to prove the whole thing wrong? That brings us to case number 2. Number 2, the boy who remembered being a World War II fighter pilot. In 1998, a baby named James Leininger was born in San Francisco to Bruce and Andrea Leininger, a perfectly normal, healthy boy. But shortly after his 2nd birthday, something changed. James started having nightmares. Violent, terrifying nightmares. He would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, kicking his legs in the air as though he were trapped inside something. He would shout, "Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out." His parents were horrified. What kind of 2-year-old has nightmares about being trapped in a burning aircraft? It got worse. During the day, James started talking about things that a toddler in Louisiana should have absolutely no knowledge of. He talked about airplanes with an almost unsettling level of expertise. He could name different types of World War II aircraft. He told his parents that he had flown off a ship, and when they asked him the name of the ship, he said one word: Natoma. His father, Bruce, a devout Christian who had zero interest in reincarnation, decided to investigate, fully expecting to debunk whatever was happening. Bruce later said that he went into this research determined to prove that his son's nightmares were just nightmares, nothing more. He was not looking for evidence of past lives. He was looking for a way to make the whole thing stop. He searched online and discovered that the USS Natoma Bay was a real aircraft carrier that served in the Pacific during World War II. It had taken part in the Battle of Iwo Jima. Bruce's stomach dropped. This was not information that a 2-year-old boy in Louisiana should have any access to. When Bruce asked James if he remembered anyone else from the ship, the little boy answered without hesitation: Jack Larson. Bruce tracked down surviving veterans of the Natoma Bay and confirmed that a pilot named Jack Larson had indeed served on that ship. But here is the twist that made this case famous around the world. Jack Larson survived the war. So James was not remembering Jack Larson's death. He was remembering his own. Further research revealed that only one pilot from the Natoma Bay was killed during the Iwo Jima operation. His name was James Houston Jr. He was 21 years old when his plane was shot down near the island of Chichijima. He died on March 3, 1945, and here is the detail that gave James's father chills. When asked who the little man in his dreams was, James always answered with one word: me. The boy had been signing his crayon drawings James 3. His parents later learned that James Houston Jr. was the third James in the Houston family line. James's case was studied by Dr. Jim Tucker, a child psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, who has spent his career investigating children's past life memories. Tucker documented multiple statements James made before the identity of James Houston was ever discovered, including a television interview with his parents that was filmed but never aired. Eventually, James Houston's surviving sister, Anne Barron, accepted that James Leininger was the reincarnation of her brother. She sent him James Houston's remaining personal artifacts. The Leiningers wrote a best-selling book about the experience called Soul Survivor. It was translated into 10 languages and briefly appeared on the New York Times bestseller list. The Netflix documentary series Surviving Death featured the case in its 6th episode. And in interviews years later, James said something remarkable. And he said the nightmares stopped once they were able to shine a light on the mystery behind his visions, as if the memories needed to be acknowledged before they could finally rest. When James was 11, his parents took him to Chichijima, the small island near where Houston's plane went down. They traveled by fishing boat to the exact site of the crash. James threw a bouquet of flowers into the ocean, and after that trip, his drawings changed. They became less chaotic, less violent, less filled with burning planes and screaming figures. Something had finally been put to rest. Bruce Leininger, the devout Christian who once called reincarnation a word he would not repeat in polite company, eventually came to accept that his son had lived before. He said it was the hardest thing he had ever done, but the evidence left him no choice. If you are finding this as fascinating as we think you are, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every single week. Now let's continue, because the next case involves physical evidence that researchers still cannot explain. Number 3. The boy who was born with bullet wounds. In 1967, a boy named Chanai Chumalai Wong was born in a small village in central Thailand. Right from birth, his family noticed 2 unusual birthmarks on his head. One was a small circular mark on the back of his skull. The other was a larger, irregularly shaped mark near his left eye. At first, no one thought much of it, but when Chanai turned 3, he started saying something that changed everything. He told the other children in his village that his name was not really Chanai. He said he had been a school teacher named Bua Kai, and he said he had been shot and killed while riding his bicycle to school. Chanai begged his grandmother over and over again to take him to the village of Ban Khao Sai, where he said his real parents lived. He was insistent. He knew the name of the village. He knew the names of people he said were his family members. He even named his wife and 2 daughters from his supposed previous life. Eventually, his grandmother gave in. The 2 of them took a bus to a town near Khao Phra, about 15 miles from their home village. And when they got off the bus, Chanai did something that stunned his grandmother. Without any guidance, without anyone telling him where to go, the 3-year-old led his grandmother through unfamiliar streets, directly to a house she had never been to before. The house belonged to an elderly couple, and when the grandmother spoke to them, she learned that they had indeed had a son named Bua Kai Launak. He had been a schoolteacher, and he had been shot and killed on his way to school 5 years before Chanai was born. The family was stunned. They invited Chanai to come back for a more thorough visit. When he returned, they tested him. They laid out Bua Kai's personal belongings mixed with other items and asked Chanai to pick out which ones had belonged to the teacher. He identified them correctly. He recognized one of Bua Kai's daughters on sight. He asked for the other one by name, and whenever he visited, he insisted that both daughters call him father. If they did not, he refused to speak to them. Think about how strange that is. A 3-year-old boy, barely taller than their knees, and demanding that grown women address him as their father. And yet, he did it with such conviction and such emotional intensity that the family eventually accepted his claim. Bua Kai's parents came to believe that Chanai truly was their murdered son, reborn. He visited them regularly throughout his childhood, and the 2 families maintained a close relationship. Chanai also displayed what researchers call proprietary attitudes toward Bua Kai's belongings. He treated them as though they were rightfully his. He showed familiarity with objects and places that a child from a village 15 miles away should have had no knowledge of. This behavioral pattern, where the child acts not just as someone who remembers a life, but as someone who still feels ownership of that life, is one of the most consistently observed features across reincarnation cases worldwide. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia who spent more than 4 decades studying cases like this, investigated Chanai's story personally. No autopsy report existed for Bua Kai, but Stevenson interviewed multiple family members who described 2 wounds on Bua Kai's head. His widow remembered the doctor saying the small wound on the back of his head was the entry point, and the larger wound on his forehead was the exit wound. Those descriptions matched Chanai's birthmarks almost exactly. A small round mark on the back of his head, a larger, irregular mark near the front. The family noted that the larger birthmark had been lower on his forehead when he was born and had migrated slightly upward as he grew, but its original position closely matched descriptions of Bua Kai's exit wound. Think about that for a moment. A child born with 2 marks on his head in the precise locations where a man he claims to have been was shot and killed, who then leads his grandmother to that man's family home without ever having been there before, and correctly identifies the dead man's children and belongings. Is there a rational explanation for this? Some scientists suggest the memories might be a form of cryptomnesia, where a child subconsciously absorbs information from overheard conversations. But Chanai lived 15 miles away from Bua Kai's village. His grandmother barely knew the family, and the boy was 3 years old. Dr. Stevenson studied more than 2,500 cases like this over his career, and he found that roughly 30% of children who reported past life memories had birthmarks or birth defects that appeared to correspond with wounds on the person whose life they claimed to remember. 30%. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And patterns demand explanations. But if you think birthmarks are compelling evidence, wait until you hear about the boy who walked into a courtroom and named his own killer. Number 4. The toddler who testified about his own murder. In a small village called Bad, near the city of Agra, in northern India, a boy named Titu Singh was born in December of 1983. Like Chanai, Titu was born with distinctive birthmarks on his head, a small circular mark on his right temple that looked exactly like a bullet entry wound, and several smaller marks on the back of his skull that resembled exit wounds. Titu was only 2.5 years old when he began telling his family things that made absolutely no sense for a toddler to know. He said his name was not Titu. He said his real name was Suresh Verma. He said he owned a radio, television, and video shop in Agra. He said he had a wife named Uma and 2 children. And he said he had been shot in the head and killed. His parents did what most parents would do. They ignored it. They figured their little boy had an overactive imagination. But Titu would not stop. He kept insisting that his real family was in Agra. He would cry and beg to go back. He even once packed his tiny clothes into a bundle and threatened to walk there by himself. And his behavior was unusual in other ways too. Titu refused to wear the simple village clothes his family could afford. He would complain about their food, saying that his wife wore silk saris and that their home in Agra was far nicer than this one. He spoke about cars and tape decks with a familiarity that made no sense for a child growing up in a poor rural household. His father once said, "Titu is just an ordinary child, but sometimes he says and does things that only adults do." One day in April 1987, Titu became extremely upset when his father traveled to Agra without taking him along. In his frustration, he blurted out a very specific detail. He said, "I have a shop of transistor radios. I am the owner of Suresh Radio." That was the clue that changed everything. Titu's older brother decided to travel to Agra to investigate. He found a shop called Suresh Radio in Sada Bazaar, and it was run by a widow named Uma, whose husband, Suresh Verma, had been a well-known shopkeeper and smuggler, and he had been shot dead in August of 1983. The 2 families had never met before. They had no connection whatsoever. When members of Suresh's family visited Titu's village, the boy spotted them approaching from across the yard. He became wildly excited and shouted to his parents that his other family had come. He recognized Suresh's widow, Uma, immediately. He recognized Suresh's parents. He even recognized two of Suresh's three brothers who were in the group. And then Titu started doing something that left everyone speechless. He recalled specific details about Suresh and Uma's private married life. He described a family outing to a fair in a neighboring village where Suresh had bought Uma sweets, and he described personal moments that only Suresh and Uma would have known. When Titu was later taken to Agra, he was put through a series of rigorous tests designed to catch him in a lie if he was fabricating his story. Suresh's two children were hidden among a large group of neighborhood kids playing in the street. Without hesitation, Titu walked right up to them and picked them out immediately, singling them out from their playmates. When brought to the Suresh radio shop, he acted as though he still owned the place. He slapped a stool hard when he entered, a habit that Suresh had been known for. He correctly identified changes that had been made to the shop since Suresh's death, pointing out a new showcase that had been installed and appearing confused by its presence. He pointed out which drawer had been used to keep cash. He recognized a photograph of Suresh on the wall and said, "That is me." The family even tried to trick him. They led him to a different shop that belonged to Suresh's brother, pretending it was Suresh Radio. Titu was not fooled. He knew it was the wrong place. Researcher Antonia Mills from the University of Virginia documented the case thoroughly. She found that Titu had made 15 verified statements before ever meeting Suresh's family, and 31 additional verified statements afterward. He correctly identified 10 people and 4 places. Only one of his statements was determined to be inaccurate. And when doctors shaved Titu's head to examine his birthmarks on camera for a BBC documentary that aired in 1990, and they found that the circular mark on his right temple lined up precisely with the entry wound described in Suresh Verma's autopsy report. The marks on the back of his skull matched the exit wound locations. But the most extraordinary part of Titu's story. In 1992, Titu testified in an Agra court. He was still just a child at this point, and yet he walked into that courtroom and provided detailed descriptions of the night Suresh Verma was murdered. He described how Suresh had been sitting in his car after arriving home from work when the assassins approached. He described the gunshot. He named the people he believed were responsible. The court accepted his testimony as credible. The police reopened the cold case that had gone unsolved for nearly a decade, and under pressure, one of the suspects eventually confessed. But this was the first time in Indian legal history that a child's claim of reincarnation played a role in a criminal investigation. A professor at Delhi University who reviewed the case said, "Because of the police involvement, this is one of the very best documented cases of seeming reincarnation I have seen." The BBC documentary that featured Titu's story in 1990 showed the two families meeting, showed the autopsy report being compared to the birthmarks, and captured the raw emotional weight of a child torn between two lives. It remains one of the most compelling pieces of visual documentation in the entire field of reincarnation research. Today, Titu Singh, now known as Tauran Singh, holds a master's degree in yoga and naturopathy. He works as an assistant professor at Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi. He is no longer the angry, frustrated child who used to beat other kids with sugarcane and threaten shopkeepers in the streets of Agra. He has found peace. but he remembers everything. And he once said that something that stays with you long after you hear it. Life is a circle, but we must live in the present. Unbelievable, but we are far from finished. The next case takes us from India all the way to a small town in Oklahoma, where a 5-year-old boy pointed to an old black and white photograph and said 7 words that would launch one of the most famous reincarnation investigations in modern history. Number 5. The boy who pointed to his own face in a 1932 movie. Ryan Hammonds was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma in 2004. His parents, Cindy and Kevin, were devout Christians. Nothing about their family or their beliefs would have predicted what happened next. When Ryan was about 4 years old, he started having intense nightmares. He would wake up in the middle of the night screaming for his mother, clutching his chest, saying his heart was exploding. He kept telling Cindy, "I used to be somebody else." Cindy did what any worried parent would do. She listened. And what Ryan told her was baffling. He said he had lived in Hollywood. He had danced on Broadway. He had traveled the world. He had been married multiple times. He had worked at an agency where people changed their names. He talked about taking girlfriends to the beach to watch the surfers. He talked about driving around in a green car that he never let anyone else touch. He even mentioned having an African-American maid. These were not the kind of things a 4-year-old boy in rural Oklahoma should be talking about. This was not a child describing things he could have seen on television or overheard in a conversation. These were weirdly specific details about a lifestyle that existed decades before he was born. He begged his mother to take him home to Hollywood. He would wake up shouting the word action as if he were on a movie set. He even once asked his mother for a drink called True Aid, a brand of orange soda that had been discontinued more than 50 years before Ryan was born. Cindy kept all of this a secret at first, terrified that people would think her son had lost his mind. But eventually, she decided to investigate. She went to the local library and started checking out books about Golden Age Hollywood. One evening, Tashi and Ryan were flipping through one of these books when they came to a photograph from a 1932 film called Night After Night. It showed several men in suits. Ryan put his finger on one of them and said, "Hey mama, that's George. We did a picture together." Then he pointed to another man in the photograph, a man with no credited name, no listed identity in the book, and said, "And mama, that guy is me. I found me." Cindy was stunned. She had no idea who either man was. She contacted Dr. Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia, the leading researcher on children's past life memories. Tucker traveled to Oklahoma to study Ryan's case. With the help of a film archivist, Tucker was able to identify the man Ryan had pointed to. His name was Marty Martin. Born Morris Kalinsky in Philadelphia to Ukrainian Jewish immigrants, Martin had tap danced on Broadway before moving to Los Angeles and opening a successful talent agency. He had been married 4 times. He died on Christmas Day in 1964 from a brain hemorrhage while hospitalized for leukemia. Ryan had never heard the name Marty Martin. Neither had his parents. Neither had anyone in the state of Oklahoma, as far as anyone could tell. And here is what makes this case extraordinary. Dr. Tucker meticulously compared Ryan's statements about his past life to the verified facts of Marty Martin's life. 55 of Ryan's specific claims were confirmed as accurate. 55. From a boy who was 5 years old. Let's go through some of them because they are truly remarkable. Ryan had said he lived on a street with the word rock in it. Marty Martin's last address was 825 North Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills. Ryan said he had a big house with a swimming pool. Martin did. Ryan said he had 3 sons he gave his name to. Martin had 3 adopted stepsons. Ryan said he knew a cowboy actor who did cigarette commercials. Martin's friend was Wild Bill Elliott, a cowboy actor who appeared in Viceroy cigarette ads. Ryan identified the other man in the photograph as George. That man was the actor George Raft. Ryan said he used to take girls to the beach to watch the surfers, and photos exist of Martin doing exactly that. Ryan mentioned restaurants in Chinatown, and when his parents first took him to a Chinese restaurant, he picked up chopsticks and used them expertly without ever having been taught how. None of these details were available online. None of them were in the book Cindy had checked out from the library. Dr. Tucker confirmed that the information Ryan was sharing was so obscure that it required contacting Martin's surviving daughter to verify most of it. And then there was one detail that initially seemed to prove Ryan wrong, only to end up proving him right. Ryan said he had died at age 61, but Marty Martin's death certificate listed his age at death as 59. Dr. Tucker investigated further and discovered that the death certificate was incorrect. Census records confirmed that Martin was actually 61 when he died. The 5-year-old from Oklahoma had been more accurate than the official government document. When a documentary crew tracked down Marty Martin's surviving daughter and introduced her to Ryan, she confirmed many of the details Ryan had shared about her father's life, details that were not available anywhere online, details that nobody outside the family would have known. As Ryan grew older, his memories began to fade, which is consistent with what researchers observe in virtually all of these cases. By the time he was about 11, he had taken down all of his Hollywood decorations and told his mother it was time to be just a regular kid. But even as the memories faded, certain traits lingered. He still loved 1950s music. He still wanted to visit New York. And perhaps most intriguingly, he developed an interest in studying Judaism, despite being raised in a Christian household. Marty Martin, born Morris Kalinsky, had been Jewish. Still with me? Good. Because this last case is not just the oldest one on our list, as it is the one that caught the attention of one of the most important figures in the entire history of India. And unlike the other cases on this list, this one was investigated not by university researchers or BBC documentary crews, but by a commission appointed by Mahatma Gandhi himself. Number 6. The girl whose past life memories reached Mahatma Gandhi. In the 1930s, while India was fighting for its independence from British rule, a strange story began circulating through the streets of Delhi. A little girl was telling everyone who would listen that she remembered living another life, that she had a husband and a son in a town called Mathura, that she had died during childbirth, and that she wanted to go home. Shanti Devi was born on December 11th, 1926, in Delhi, India. For the first 4 years of her life, she barely spoke at all. But when she finally did start talking, the things she said left her parents absolutely bewildered. She told them that she was not really their daughter. She said her real home was in a city called Mathura, about 90 miles away. She said she had a husband named Kedar Nath, who was a cloth merchant. She described her home in detail, right down to the layout of the rooms and what kind of food they ate. She used words from the Mathura dialect that were not spoken in Delhi, and she said that she had died shortly after giving birth to a son. Her parents dismissed it as childhood fantasy, but Shanti would not stop. She talked about her past life at school. She told her teachers. She described her husband as a fair-skinned man with a wart on his left cheek who wore reading glasses. As she would sit at meals and complain that in her other home she ate different kinds of sweets and better food. When they ignored her, she tried to run away from home at age 6, attempting to walk to Mathura on her own. She made it surprisingly far before she was found and brought back. Her school's headmaster grew curious. He decided to investigate. He sent a letter to the address Shanti described in Mathura, addressed to a merchant named Kedar Nath. Nobody expected a reply, but one came. A man named Kedar Nath Chobe lived at that address. He was a cloth merchant, and his wife, Lugdi Devi, had died on October 4th, 1925, 10 days after giving birth to their son, just over a year before Shanti was born. Eventually, one of her schoolteachers sent a letter to the address Shanti described in Mathura, and addressed to a merchant named Kedar Nath. Nobody expected a reply, but one came. A man named Kedar Nath Chobe lived at that address. He was a cloth merchant, and his wife, Lugdi Devi, had died on October 4th, 1925, 10 days after giving birth to their son, just over a year before Shanti was born. When Kedar Nath travelled to Delhi to meet Shanti, he came disguised, pretending to be his own brother. But the moment Shanti saw him, she blushed and stood to the side. When someone asked why she was embarrassed in front of her husband's brother, she said quietly, "No, he is not my husband's brother. He is my husband himself." She recognized Kedar Nath's son, who was now about 10 years old. She burst into tears upon seeing him. She described intimate details of their married life together, as she recalled private events that only Lugdi and Kedar Nath could have known. Kedar Nath later said that every response she gave to his questions was entirely accurate. He reportedly told investigators, "It was as though my dead wife was speaking." The case became so famous across India that it reached the ears of Mahatma Gandhi himself. Gandhi was so intrigued that he personally met with Shanti Devi and then formed an official commission to investigate her claims. This commission included prominent lawyers, parliamentarians, and national leaders. They travelled with Shanti to Mathura in November 1935, keeping her under close observation and carefully documenting every statement she made and every person she recognized. In Mathura, Shanti navigated the streets with confidence, pointing out changes that had been made to the town since Lugdi's death over a decade earlier. She identified family members from a crowd of people. She recognized Lugdi Devi's grandfather. She recognized Lugdi's sister. And then she led investigators to a specific spot in the house where she said she had buried some money during her life as Lugdi. When they dug, they found nothing. Shanti insisted the money had been there. She was visibly confused and upset. And then Kedar Nath, standing right there, sheepishly admitted that he had secretly taken the money after Lugdi died. The money had been exactly where Shanti said it would be. He had simply gotten there first. The commission published its findings in 1936 and concluded that Shanti Devi was genuinely the reincarnation of Lugdi Devi. Dr. Ian Stevenson later investigated the case as well and confirmed that Shanti had made at least 24 statements about her past life that were verified as accurate. Shanti Devi never married. She said she could not because, as far as she was concerned, she was already a widow, and Hindu custom holds that widows should not remarry. She lived quietly and gave interviews about her experiences throughout her life. When a Swedish author named Sture Lonnerstrand traveled all the way to India to expose her story as a fraud, he ended up writing that it was the only fully explained and proven case of reincarnation there has been. She was interviewed one final time by researchers just 4 days before her death on December 27, 1987. She was 61 years old, and she still carried the memories of Lugdi Devi as clearly as the day she first spoke about them as a 4-year-old girl in Delhi. So what do we make of all of this? 6 cases, 6 different countries and cultures, 6 children who remembered names, faces, addresses, and deeply private details of people who died before they were born. Birthmarks that matched fatal wounds with medical precision. A skeleton found exactly where a toddler said it would be. A murder weapon recovered from a spot pointed out by a 3-year-old. A killer who confessed when confronted by a child he had never met. A 5-year-old who corrected an official government death certificate. A court that accepted a child's testimony about his own murder. And a commission established by Mahatma Gandhi that concluded reincarnation had genuinely occurred. And these are not urban legends. These are not Reddit threads or TikTok stories that got passed around until the details became unrecognizable. These are documented, investigated, peer-reviewed cases. And there are thousands more like them. Behind all of these individual stories stands more than half a century of academic research at one of the most respected universities in the world. Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia began studying children's past life memories in the 1960s. He traveled the world, interviewing children and their families, cross-referencing their claims with historical records, medical reports, and eyewitness testimony. When he passed away in 2007, his colleague Dr. Jim Tucker continued the work. Together, they have documented over 2,500 cases from cultures spanning every inhabited continent. The patterns they found are remarkably consistent, regardless of whether the child lives in a Buddhist village in Thailand, a Druze community in Israel, a Hindu family in India, or a Christian household in the American Midwest. Children typically begin speaking about their past lives between ages 2 and 5. Their memories usually fade by age 6 or 7. About 30% have birthmarks or birth defects that correspond to wounds on the deceased person they claim to have been. The median age of the previous person at the time of death is 28, and the median time between the previous person's death and the child's birth is just 16 months. Traumatic deaths, especially murders, appear to create the strongest and most persistent memories. Children who remember dying violently often have nightmares, phobias, and intense emotional reactions that correspond exactly to the trauma of their supposed previous life. A child who claims to have drowned might have an unexplainable fear of water. A child who claims to have been shot might be born with birthmarks where the bullets entered and exited. A child who claims to have died in a plane crash might wake up screaming about fire every night for years. And here is what makes these patterns so difficult to explain away. They show up across cultures that have no contact with each other. A Druze boy in the Golan Heights and a Christian boy in Louisiana exhibit the same behavioral patterns, the same age of onset, the same age of memory fading, the same emotional intensity. If this were purely cultural conditioning, you would expect the patterns to be different in each culture. But they are not. And they are strikingly similar everywhere researchers have looked. Tucker himself put it this way. He said, "These cases demand an explanation. We cannot just write them off or explain them away as just some sort of normal cultural thing." And the late Carl Sagan, one of the most famous skeptics in the history of science, once listed children's past life memories as one of only 3 claims in all of parapsychology that he felt deserved serious scientific study. That is not an endorsement of reincarnation, but it is an acknowledgement that something genuinely unusual is happening with these children, and it warrants investigation rather than dismissal. So we have to ask ourselves, is there a conventional explanation for all of this? Cryptomnesia, false memories, cultural conditioning, confirmation bias. The list of skeptical counter-arguments exists, and some of them have merit in certain cases. But when you look at the cases where a child with no connection to a deceased person provides dozens of verified facts, leads investigators to hidden graves and concealed weapons, and carries physical marks that match the wounds of a stranger who died before the child was born, the conventional explanations start to feel very thin. Maybe there is something about consciousness that we do not yet understand, something about the nature of memory or identity, or whatever it is that makes us who we are, that persists beyond what we currently believe is possible. Maybe death is not the final page, but a chapter break. Maybe the memories of who we were do not always disappear when the body does. Or maybe not. That maybe all of this has a perfectly rational explanation that we simply have not discovered yet. Maybe in 50 years, neuroscience will unlock some mechanism that explains every single one of these cases. But right now, today, with the evidence we have, there are over 2,500 children whose stories have been carefully documented by researchers at a world-class university. And those stories remain unexplained. After hearing these 6 cases, I think we can all agree on one thing. The question is worth asking, and the children who carry these memories deserve to be heard. Which case fascinated you the most? Was it the Druze boy who found his own skeleton? James leading us screaming about planes on fire at age 2? T2 Singh testifying about his own murder in court? Or Ryan Hammonds pointing to his own face in a photograph from 1932? Now let us know in the comments below. We are genuinely excited to hear what you think. And while you're down there, tell us this. Do you think we are truly gone when we die? Or is there something more waiting on the other side? If you found this video as mind-blowing as we did, hit that subscribe button and give the video a like. It is completely free, and it helps us keep making these videos for you every single week. If you want to see more stories that challenge everything we think we know about reality, the video on your screen right now is a great place to start. We will see you there.